So thank you and good morning to everyone. Thank you, Georgi, for making the housekeeping, and welcome from my side also to our Cybersecurity Leadership Summit, where we'll touch a rather broad variety of topics around cybersecurity. A lot of them related to AI, which currently is heavily influencing the way we do cybersecurity, and we do identity management, which again is closely related to cybersecurity, but also many other facets of this broader topic of cybersecurity. So in the next remaining 17 minutes or so, I'll quickly walk through some thoughts and some ideas I have around how AI already revolutionizes the way we do cybersecurity in IAM, and also focus a little on how does this, or where do I, from my analyst perspective, really see a benefit in that. And as always with new technologies, we need to be careful. So AI is one of these buzzwords of the year, and every sorry to the marketing people in the room, but every marketing department tends to put an AI sticker on the products. There might be very little AI and it might be not very meaningful, but AI currently helps selling. So we need to be careful and think about where does it really deliver a benefit. And so first, when you look at cybersecurity and identity management, and what are the overarching trends, we see a lot of change, and that is also a reason why we need to make sort of technical advancements here. And one of these changes affects identities and access. So we see that this entire world of how we do identity and access management is changing. We see a focus on all types of identities. We see that access management, so the sort of the runtime access, is gaining momentum. We have this big thing around zero trust, which is out for quite a while, and which is affecting a lot of security thinking, and still leading to a lot of discussions when I look at the various businesses where we see a lot of discussion around what does it really mean, what does it mean for us, and we had yesterday a little bit of a talk about zero trust. There will be other sessions focusing on that. And then obviously there's AI, and AI is also definitely impacting the way we do a lot of things. And AI potentially can help us in doing certain things better by supporting analysis, by identifying anomalies, outliers, etc. I'll touch this in a minute. And we have also, as another important trend, we have this shift to API and microservices. And I'm, just as a side note, I'm a strong believer that good software today should be built on a microservices architecture, ready to deploy it in containers, to run in various deployment models. That is one of the things where I believe it's really time to look at. And so from these big trends, we see AI is one of these big four trends. And I think there's a good reason why we have to look at AI, because we have a pretty tough life these days in cybersecurity. There are a lot of things which really challenge us in cybersecurity, which is the skills gap, which is the ever-increasing number of attacks, and I don't see any sign of change. We have these zero-day attacks, which actually are long-running before they are detected. So zero-day is a pretty positive term for something which is even worse. We have an industry behind cybercrime. There are business models that appear to be working quite well. We have this imbalance of attack and defense. So an attacker needs one attack that works. We need to defend against each and every attack. So our position as defenders, I assume most of you are defenders, not attackers in the room. The defender position is far worse. We have far more volatile environments as part of DevOps. We have the cloud, which is in some areas positive because we have someone who hopefully cares in a very professional manner for security, and large cloud service providers can put far more effort than every single business can. On the other hand, data is sprawling. And we have an ever-increasing business impact of things that go wrong in cybersecurity. So when things go wrong, in the worst case, that can kill a business. So severe attacks that really put your IT out of order, out of work for a while, are extremely costly. And just a couple of days, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I've learned that from one of the anti-malware vendors, one of the patches failed greatly, and a couple of organizations, a couple of businesses I know had production outage, so their manufacturing lines stopped. And we all know in a manufacturing business, if you're not producing your goods for a day or so, or for a couple of hours, that's really costly. These things can affect it. And so the big question is AI and ML is this sort of the holy grail of cybersecurity, or how can AI and ML can support cybersecurity? To answer the first question, obviously no, there's no holy grail. Technology can help in certain areas. They can improve things, but it's not that it will solve everything. And we need to be very careful on where does it really help and where is it maybe slightly overestimated. So where can it help? One of the areas, and probably maybe the most relevant today, is anomaly detection. However, and I think that's something always to be kept in mind, AI primarily works well when it has a large amount of data it can work on. So there's this, the numbers might be a little lower or higher, but there's this comparison of how many sort of samples does a machine learning system need to distinguish between a dog and a cat. And the numbers you get are somewhere between 100,000 and 1 million or even more. A kid needs maybe 10. So AIs and ML is really a rather dumb technology compared to humans. When you look at the number of samples required. In other words, if you don't have large amounts of data, anomaly detection in tendency is more limited. We have decision support, and in some way decision support, I think there are various ways to do that. Working on text, identifying anomalies, identifying the outliers, all that stuff helps in decision support. And if done right, there is a lot of potential. This entire fuzzy search thing, which is another really new technology, is clearly one of the areas where it helps. So finding things which are not, which don't fit the exact search term. Text understanding. We see this in many areas. So one of the areas where I find this is pretty interesting is, for instance, also in the legal space, where you have a lot of text to read and where AI can help picking the right text, the right court decisions, etc. We see it very practically implemented in threat intelligence. Again, this is actually also around anomaly detection, reducing the number of data points, etc. User behavior analytics is another type of application. So again, it's about the anomalies. So where are the anomalies in the user behavior? One of these areas where we obviously need to be very careful, because when we look at these things, we can also greatly fail in AI. So when we start doing these things and then we approaching the end of the fiscal year, there might be very different user behaviors for a good reason, because they are only done by the end of the fiscal year. And then if our system stops people from working on their tasks by the end of the fiscal year, we might really end up in some bigger trouble. So we need to do it right, and that's also one of the areas where I believe we need to come to a point where we need to have some understanding and some control about what the AI is doing. So not just the secret sauce, which does something, but we need some ways to control what AI is doing, to inject sort of knowledge which influences the decisions, etc. Threat analysis, close to threat intelligence. But going more into detail of certain defined threats, and maybe at some point automated reaction, all based on that. And it's not that this is pure AI. It's usually, and that's also, I think, very important, also usually a combination of AI and other stuff. So when we look at cybersecurity, there are a couple of areas where I believe and where I know we are already benefiting from applied AI. And there will be more. And I think it's a very logical thing because we have, specifically around threats and behavior, we have usually a lot of data points. And we can do a lot of things based on that. And the bigger you are, the better you can do. How does this look for IAM? So when I look at a broad range of technologies within IAM, where are the areas where I believe that AI can has a very strong potential? And oops, that was once too. And it was a mistake of me formatting. So look at the red ones first. Obviously, I missed some when I built my slides. So the red ones, the ones circled red, are the areas where I believe we have the strongest potential for AI. A lot of this is around authentication. And then again, in the adjacent areas, which are not really IAM, but which are related to IAM, which are, for instance, again, user behavior analytics and the entire cybersecurity area. So for all this authentication stuff, it's identifying anomalies in behavior. And this is something which is also not entirely new. When you look at banks, they are using risk-adaptive authentication technologies or credit card providers, etc., for many years. Looking at signs of anomalies and then asking for maybe a second authentication, etc. And there are a couple of areas where I see some potential, but maybe a lesser level of potential. In many cases in IAM, and I'll talk about this in another talk, I think at early afternoon, I think at 1, in the German language track, by the way. I'll go into more detail on the IAM stuff. But basically, for several other areas, the challenge is we might just not have enough data points to be super good in what we do with AI. Again, it's always a question of having sufficient data points. And so I think it's very important to understand where does AI really help or not. And we touched yesterday, I believe, to some extent, the workshop, but also in the evening session we had, the KCX talk, we touched some methodologies on how to compare different types of technologies. And obviously we can compare sort of traditional rule-based adaptive authentication approaches with more AI-powered approaches. And then we might end up with a scenario where we know that probably the number of use cases supported today is broader for rule-based stuff because it also works well for scenarios where we don't have that large amount of data, while the AI-based use cases always will require a larger amount of data. Maturity is bigger here, but we might get better in our results when we work really with AI as part of the solution. It never will be pure AI versus pure rule-based. Time to production might be longer because the system first might need to learn. We shouldn't underestimate it. And by the way, when we talk about this learning thing, machine learning, the term learning not only implies that someone is learning, but it also implies that there is a teacher in some way. We shouldn't forget about that when we look at machine learning. So we need to train systems. And at the end, this is something which is, I think, quite frequently ignored when vendors talk about machine learning, that the effort can be quite reasonable to train a system. And it's also sort of a lifelong learning. Machine learning is not done in a short period at the beginning. You always should assume that there's lifelong learning of your system, as long as the system lives in that case, which for IT systems on average is less than for a human. So look at it realistically, compare these technologies and try to understand, do they really deliver benefit and where are the challenges we have? And some of these challenges, as I've said, include the learning part, it might include the maturity and other stuff. So this is something we need to look at. there are various aspects we can look at, so you'll get access to the slide deck for download. As I've said, there are a couple of elements we can look at. And then we need to understand, does it really help? And then we can also look at different types of technologies, put them into a portfolio, and don't nail me on this picture. So we can probably have an argument about every single data point or a single point in that. But basically, there are technologies where I see a stronger, bigger security impact and a bigger maturity. So in the field of security intelligence, also to some extent the fraud detection or user behavior analytics, there's some more maturity. If I had a bad day when creating that, probably there would be far more space above all of the data points, because we could clearly argue that none of these solutions is really mature, so that we might say we are really in the very, very early steps of what we are doing. But let's look at it a little bit more positive in the sense of, yes, you can use it and you can have a benefit. Adaptive authentication, etc. While other technologies will currently benefit only little. I see a lot of work done, for instance, around access governance. I'm a little skeptical in some areas just because of the number of data points. So identifying whether entitlements are correct or not is not easy in a single organization if you have relatively few users. So it will be interesting to see where this ends. But basically, we have already a situation where we have a lot of impact of AI on cybersecurity and on identity management. This will continue. And there's a big potential, but we always should remain somewhat skeptical and just step back and look at it realistically. So where's the benefit and what is sort of the cost at which these technologies come? Because I touched it with learning, I touched it with the number of data points and other things. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And there's not a technology which does everything better than everything we had before. It's more a continuum, a continuous improvement of technologies. And yes, it helps, and it helps us to deal with the sheer amount of security data, etc. That's where I see the biggest potential. We have a lot of research around AI already and around AI and cybersecurity. You all have these KC Plus things on your desk. It's rather easy and affordable to gain access to our research right now. As I've said, there's a lot around that, around cybersecurity and around IAM. So thank you for listening to my opening keynote.